Hi everyone. So today I'm just going to briefly summarize my study, Where Did Where Go? Lexical Variation and Change in Third Person Male Adult Noun Reference in Old and Middle English. So to refer to a male adult in the third person, speakers of present-day varieties of English have several lexical items to choose from. They can say, look at that man over there, look at that guy over there, or look at that dude over there. And depending on various regional, social, and stylistic factors, they may have various other variants at their disposal too. But of course, variation within this semantic field is not new and has existed since the beginning of the history of the English language. So according to a thesaurus of Old English, there were at least 25 nouns attested in Old English that were used to refer to a male adult in the third person. In this study, I show that of these variants, where, spelled W-E-R, was the most frequently used noun to refer to a male adult in the third person in Old English. But it goes from being the most frequently used noun to one that is, for the most part, barely recognizable today. It only survives in certain retention compounds like werewolf, which literally means man-wolf, half man, half wolf. Well, one of the hallmarks of linguistic change is the so-called S-curve pattern, where incoming forms are thought to be adopted at a rate of slow to fast to slow. And while this is not the only trajectory of change, it is of course a common one. If we compare the current system of variants with the variants that were used historically, we can clearly see that there's some change that's taken place within this semantic field. But the question is, does lexical change within this semantic field follow an S-curve pattern? Although lexical replacement is expected to follow an S-curve distribution, to date S-curve patterns have been modeled predominantly on phonetic, morphological, and discourse pragmatic features. There's been surprisingly little research on the applicability of S-curves to and for lexical change. S-curve patterns can be found in literature for lexical change, but these are usually based on apparent time as opposed to real-time diachronic data. In this study, I'm dealing with a time depth of approximately 600 years, so I look at changes within this semantic field from the beginning of the Old English period towards the end of the Middle English period. So there are two research questions that I address in the study. The first deals with the distribution and frequency of these variants over time from Old English to Middle English, and that's what I'll focus on today. And the second looks at the factors that maybe influence the decision to use one of these variants over a comparable counterpart at different intervals in time. So what I did is I compiled a list of these variants from previous literature, dictionaries, and thesauruses, and then I searched for these in the Helsinki corpus of English texts, so using the Old English and Middle English components. And I should add that I also supplemented some of this data with outside sources as well. And following traditional variationist methods, various contexts had to be removed because they were not functionally comparable. So only tokens were included that had clear male adult reference. So these are some examples of various contexts that were not included in the envelope of variation and therefore had to be removed. So let's take a look at the results. So on the left, you see the distribution of variants in Old English, and as you can see, where was the most frequently used noun to refer to a male adult in the third person in Old English, and it occupied about 42% of this semantic field. But over time, by Middle English, where has been replaced by the gender-specific use of man, which now occupies around 57% of this semantic field. Where is only attested a few times at the beginning of the early Middle English period, and then it's not used. So this change that's happened here, this lexical change, where has been replaced by the gender-specific use of man. Now, interestingly, if you look at these changes over time, so if you take a look at this graph here, so the dotted line refers to the frequency of where from Old English to Middle English. And the bolded grey line refers to the frequency of this gender-specific use of man. And as you can see, the replacement of where with man appears to follow a nice S-shaped distribution. So in this study, I show that where was the most frequently used noun to refer to a man, a male adult in Old English, but over time it was replaced by man, the gender-specific use of man in Middle English, and this replacement appears to follow a prototypical S-shaped trajectory. And that suggests that while lexical change does not have to follow an S-curve pattern, lexical changes can indeed follow an S-curve trajectory. I didn't really talk about this too much today, but in the paper I also discuss how various linguistic and external factors influence different lexical choices at different intervals in time. And I also address in the paper why this replacement may have taken place. We see early on that where is already on a downward trajectory, so it's already going out of favor. If we look at towards the end of the Old English period, we see lower frequency of where. But quite interestingly, by the time we get to Middle English, we get contact with Norman French and Anglo-Norman, and I hypothesize in the paper that this language contact may have contributed to this, or may have accelerated this replacement of where with the gender-specific use of man, and that's because during this period of language contact, we borrow the Norman French loanword where, which is ultimately our word for war today, and that was likely homophonous with the Old English where for man. And I speculate that perhaps this created some kind of homonymic clash. So this is not the cause of this change, but it may have accelerated this change in Middle English. So in this study, I show that the system of third-person male adult noun reference is a dynamic and heterogeneous one with variants being replaced at different intervals in time. Like in the present day, the paper shows that various linguistic and external factors influence lexical changes. Lexical choices, and while apparent time studies point to the applicability of S-curve patterns for lexical change, this study adds a very important diachronic dimension by adding looking at this over a 600-year period. So that was a very short summary of the paper. If you're interested in reading more, it's about to come out in Language Variation and Change. So I'll just quickly go to the next 2 slides just to show you the references. So thank you for listening.